Dad announced to the entire family that I'd already agreed to watch my sister's kids for 10 days. I was sitting in a cabin in the Smoky Mountains with no cell service, a stack of books, and the first real silence I'd had in 8 months. He left 7 voicemails before I even saw the first one. My name is Zoe, I'm 32. I work as a travel nurse, which means I pick up contracts at different hospitals around the country, usually in 12-week blocks. It sounds glamorous to people who don't do it. It isn't. You're constantly the outsider on a unit where everyone else has worked together for years. You take the worst shifts because you're the one with no seniority. You get the patients other nurses quietly dread. I've done it for 6 years because I'm good at it and because the pay is significantly better than staff positions, but it grinds you down in ways that are hard to explain to people who clock out at 5 and sleep in their own bed every night. Last fall, I finished a brutal contract in Phoenix. 12 weeks in a cardiac step-down unit that was chronically understaffed. I worked 50-plus hours most weeks, covered 3 extra shifts when other nurses called out, and watched 2 patients die on the same night in early November in a way I still haven't fully processed. When the contract ended, I had 3 weeks before my next placement. I rented a small cabin outside Gatlinburg, Tennessee. Just me, some groceries, a ridiculous number of books, and no plan except to do nothing for as long as my nervous system needed. I told my family I'd be offline. Not completely. I checked in once every couple of days, but I was very clear that I was unreachable for anything that wasn't a genuine emergency. My mom understood. She always does. My dad heard what he wanted to hear, which, as I've learned over 32 years, is whatever version of my words is most convenient for him. My younger sister has 2 kids. A boy named Cooper, who just turned 5, and a girl named Ivy, who's 3. They're genuinely sweet kids. I love them. But loving someone's children is not the same thing as having the bandwidth to be their sole caregiver for 10 days. My sister and her husband had been planning a trip to Cancun for what felt like 2 years, delayed first by COVID, then by money stuff, then by the timing never working out. They finally booked it. Flights, resort, the whole thing. Gorgeous all-inclusive place, the kind with swim-up bars and no kids allowed in 2 of the pools. They were thrilled. I was happy for them, genuinely. What I did not know was that my dad had volunteered me, not suggested. Not floated the idea, volunteered me, past tense. Done deal. He apparently called my sister in October, while I was still in the middle of my Phoenix contract, and told her that I'd be between assignments in November and that I'd love to have the kids. He used the word love. He told her it was already figured out. He did not tell me. The first I heard about any of it was 3 days into my cabin stay. I had a weak bar of service at a pull-off about a mile down the mountain where I sometimes stopped to check messages. I had a text from my sister, cheerful and grateful, with a detailed itinerary attached. Drop off on the 14th, pick up on the 24th. She'd typed up Cooper's school schedule, Ivy's nap times, their food preferences, the name of their pediatrician, pages of notes. She'd been planning around this assumption for weeks. I sat in my car at that pull-off for a long time. I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment, because it wasn't just annoyance. It was something older than that. My dad has done this my whole life, made decisions about my time without asking, then presented them as settled facts so that any objection I raise makes me the problem. I'm the one disrupting things. I'm the one being difficult. When I was in nursing school, he signed me up to help his friend move without mentioning it to me. When I graduated, he told relatives I was taking a job locally before I'd made any decision. Small things, big things, always the same pattern. He decides, he announces, he makes it everyone else's problem to push back. And the cruelest part of it is that he frames it as love. He's proud of me. He brags about me to his friends. He tells people I'm the dependable one in the family. What he means is that I am the one who has not yet cost him anything to brag about because I have never, not once in 32 years, made him face a real consequence for this. I call my friend Tara that evening from the pull-off. She's a former nurse, now a case manager, and she has the kind of practical intelligence that cuts through my tendency to spiral into guilt. I read her my sister's itinerary text. I told her the whole story. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "He volunteered your recovery time after a contract that wrecked you. Does he know what the last 12 weeks were like for you?" I said he knew the broad strokes. She said he knew enough, and he did it anyway. That landed differently than I expected. I'd been framing it as my dad not thinking things through, being careless, not meaning harm. Tara reframed it in one sentence. He knew I was depleted. He volunteered me anyway, because my depletion doesn't register as a real factor compared to his ability to be the helpful one in my sister's life. The question, she said, is what you actually want to do, not what will cause the least conflict. What do you want? What do you want? What I wanted was my cabin, my books, my quiet, the mountains. I wanted to finish healing from a job that had taken more from me than I'd budgeted for. I wanted to wake up without an alarm and drink coffee on the porch and feel like a person again before I went back to being a nurse who shows up in strangers' hospitals and absorbs everything. I drove back up the mountain and sat on the porch until dark thinking about it. The thing my dad had not counted on was that this time I'd actually been thinking about boundaries in a concrete way, not in the abstract self-help way I'd been ignoring for years. A therapist I'd seen briefly between contracts in the spring had said something that stuck. The reason people keep treating you the same way is that nothing has changed the math. Making it unpleasant for them in the moment isn't enough. What changes behavior is a real consequence that they actually experience, not just hear about. I thought about that for 3 days. I went back and forth. Part of me drafted a careful, reasonable text to my dad explaining my situation and asking him to fix it. I wrote it 4 times and deleted it 4 times because I knew how it would go. He would listen warmly, sympathize gently, and then slowly redirect until I was somehow agreeing to a modified version of the original plan. He is exceptional at this. He has had 32 years of practice with me specifically. So instead, I thought about what Tara had said. What do I actually want? And then I thought about what would make it real. What would make the math change? I called my sister directly. Not to back out. Not yet, but just to talk, and to understand what she actually knew. She was surprised to hear from me mid-cabin trip. We talked for maybe 40 minutes. She told me she'd had a few questions when Dad first floated the idea, but he'd been so confident, and she and her husband had been trying to make this trip work for so long, and she'd told herself that if Zoe had a problem with it, she'd say something. I asked her, gently, whether Dad had mentioned that I was in recovery mode after a rough contract. She was quiet. He said he'd be taking a little break between jobs, she said. He didn't frame it like that. We talked honestly for the rest of that call in a way we hadn't in a while. She didn't know about the night in November with the 2 patients. She didn't know the extent of what the Phoenix contract had been. By the end, she wasn't defending the plan. She was just sad about the situation. She said, I would never have asked you to do this if I'd known. I believe her. That's the thing about my dad's method. It insulates him from accountability by making sure the people he volunteers to feel grateful to him, rather than responsible for the pressure they're actually creating. My sister and I ended the call without a resolution, just an understanding that we were both going to need to talk to our dad. I told her I would reach out to him first. I called him that evening. I want to be fair to this part of the story. I was direct but not cruel. I told him I'd spoken to my sister. I told him I had not agreed to watch the kids. I told him that I was in the middle of recovery time that I genuinely needed, and that he had committed my time without asking. I asked him to please contact my sister and let her know that he had spoken out of turn. His response was something I should have written down verbatim because I know I'm going to paraphrase it weekly. The tone was calm and reasonable and kind. He said he knew I worked hard and he was proud of me and he would never want to pressure me. Then he said that my sister had been counting on this, that they'd already made the resort payments, that Cooper and Ivy loved me, that I always said I wanted to be more present in our lives. He said my sister would be devastated. He said he'd thought I'd be glad for the company, that being alone in a cabin for 3 weeks sounded isolating to him honestly. Then he said he'd told a few other family members I was doing this and they'd all thought it was really sweet of me. That last part was delivered casually, just slipped in. It was masterful, and I mean that in the most exhausted way possible. He had made it so that backing out now would require me to disappoint my sister, upset a trip that had already been paid for, look selfish to relatives who'd been told a version of events that cast me as willing and generous, and contradict my own stated desire to be more present with my niece and nephew. Every angle covered. No yelling, no guilt-tripping in an obvious way. Just a quietly constructed situation where agreeing was the only path that didn't make me the villain. After we hung up, I sat with the phone in my hands for a long time. Then I did something I had never done before in my life. I did not call him back. I did not draft a response. I did not spiral into the familiar cycle of trying to find the argument that would make him understand. I opened my laptop and I bought myself another week in the cabin. Then I sat down and wrote a message to my sister. Not my dad. My sister. I told her directly and plainly that I was not going to be able to watch the kids, that this was not her fault, and that she needed to know that Dad had done this without my knowledge or agreement. I told her I was sorry she'd been put in this position and that I hoped she could find another arrangement. I told her if she wanted to talk, I was available. Then I sent it and closed my laptop. She called within the hour. She was upset, but not at me. She was upset at the situation, and underneath the upset there was something else. Recognition, I think. A kind of tired familiarity. She said, "He did something like this when I was planning my wedding, with the guest list. I hadn't known that." We talked for a long time. At the end, she said she was going to figure out childcare. She said, "I believe you. And I'm sorry he put you in the middle of this without telling either of us what he was actually doing." What followed was the week I had already had, plus another one. My dad called 4 times over the next 2 days. I let them go to voicemail. He left messages that were initially calm and explanatory, and then progressively less so. By the 4th message, the warmth was thin, and the disappointment was showing through clearly. He used the phrase, "the whole family is wondering," which is the specific kind of thing he says when he wants you to feel like a verdict has been passed in absentia. He said my sister was scrambling. He said it reflected on all of us when we didn't show up for each other. I listened to all 4 messages in order, once, and then I made myself a cup of coffee and watched the creek outside the cabin window for a while. I want to try to describe what was happening internally, because the external part, woman doesn't answer phone, stays in cabin, sounds simple. Internally it was not simple. I'd spent my whole adult life being the reliable one, the one who showed up, the one who rearranged, not because I was pressured every time, but because somewhere early I'd internalized the idea that being needed was how I earned my place in this family. I was the one without a husband, without kids, without the traditional markers that get you taken seriously in a family like mine. What I had was competence and availability, and I had leveraged both for years to stay in everyone's good graces. Staying in that cabin was the first time I'd chosen my own actual need over my family's comfort, and the internal experience of it was not clean triumph. It was guilt and doubt and the specific fear that this would be the thing they held against me forever, that I'd spent 32 years building something and I was about to lose it over a vacation. Tara checked in by text midway through the week. I told her what was happening. She asked how I was doing. I typed back that I felt terrible and relieved at the same time. She said, "That's what doing the right thing feels like sometimes when you're new at it." That helped more than I expected. My sister figured out childcare. Their regular daycare had a holiday extended care program they hadn't looked into yet, and her mother-in-law agreed to cover 3 of the 10 nights. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. My sister texted me to let me know and then added, "I'm still going. We need this trip. But I want you to know this wasn't what I wanted either." I wrote back that I was glad she was going. I meant it. My dad didn't reach out to me again until after Thanksgiving. The day they would have dropped the kids off at my cabin, I woke up early, made coffee, and sat on the porch watching the fog come off the mountain. I thought about the version of that morning where 2 car doors were opening in my driveway back home, where Cooper was running toward the front door full of energy, where I was putting on a face and pretending to be glad while quietly knowing I did not have anything left to give. I thought about what it costs to be available in that way when you are genuinely empty, and then I drank my coffee and watched the mountains and felt something I can only describe as my nervous system unclenching. The Thanksgiving call with my dad was uncomfortable. He was cordial in the way that means he is still managing the situation rather than engaging with it. He did not apologize. He asked how the cabin was, as if the whole thing had been a minor scheduling mix-up rather than a pattern we were finally looking at directly. I answered his questions and I did not perform warmth I wasn't feeling. It was the first conversation I could remember where I didn't try to smooth it over for him. Afterward, his sister, my aunt, texted me. She'd apparently heard things from various angles. She didn't take a side exactly, but she said, "For what it's worth, I've seen him do this to people before. You're not imagining it." I hadn't asked for that, and I was more grateful for it than I expected. It mattered to have someone in the family confirm that I wasn't the one who had gotten things wrong. My sister and her husband had a good trip. She sent me a photo from the resort, turquoise water, both of them looking more relaxed than I'd seen them in years. I was genuinely glad. I sent back a heart. When I came home from the cabin and started my next contract in early December, something had shifted. Not dramatically, not in a way that resolved everything. My dad and I haven't had a real conversation about what happened. He's not the kind of person who will. But I stopped pretending it hadn't happened, and that turned out to be the most significant thing. I stopped covering for him in small ways I hadn't fully noticed I'd been doing. At Christmas, when my aunt asked why the cabin trip had gotten complicated, I said simply that Dad had volunteered my time without asking, and that I'd had to set that straight. I didn't elaborate. I didn't apologize for it. My aunt nodded like this was the least surprising thing she'd heard all year. My dad was across the room. He heard me say it. He didn't respond. What I know now, after everything, is that the people who rely on your reliability to override your own needs are not bad people, usually. My dad loves me. I actually believe that. But love that comes with the expectation that you will always make yourself available. That your needs are the flexible variable in every equation. That you will go on absorbing whatever gets assigned to you because you have absorbed it before. That kind of love, if you want to call it that, is only comfortable for one person in the arrangement. I spent so many years being the easy one, the competent one, the one nobody had to worry about. And I thought that was the deal, that if I didn't need anything, I got to stay. What I figured out in that cabin, slowly between books and bad coffee and long walks and too much thinking, is that the deal was never real. The family wasn't going to love me less if I said no. And if they did, that was information I needed. The mountains were there for another week after I extended the stay. The fog every morning, the creek sound all night, the specific silence of a place where no one needs anything from you. I read 4 more books. I slept 9 hours some nights. I ate what I wanted when I wanted it. When I finally drove home, there was no dramatic send-off, no revelation on the last morning, just the long road back down out of the hills. The radio on, a coffee from a gas station in a paper cup. The quiet company of having finally, for once, chosen myself. That's enough. It turned out that's actually enough. I've thought a lot about why it took me 32 years to do something that, from the outside, probably looks simple. Just say no. Just don't answer. Just stay in the cabin. People hear the story and make it sound easy, like the only thing standing between me and that boundary was a little courage. But it wasn't about courage. Not exactly. It was about a story I'd been telling myself for so long it had become invisible. The story that my value in this family was conditional, that I stayed in the picture by being useful, that the cost of being difficult even once was more than I could afford. My dad didn't create that story alone. I helped build it every time I rearranged myself before anyone even asked me to. Every time I volunteered flexibility I didn't actually have. Every time I laughed off something that had actually hurt. I made it very easy for him to believe there were no limits, because I had never shown him where the limits were. That's the part that's hard to sit with. Not that he did it, but that I made it so frictionless for so long that he genuinely may not have understood he was doing anything wrong. The thing about patterns is they don't break dramatically. There's no single confrontation that fixes everything. I didn't come back from that cabin a new person. I came back the same person who'd left, tired, a little more honest with herself, still figuring it out. My dad and I haven't had the conversation. We may never have it in the clean, resolved way I used to imagine it, but something shifted anyway, because I stopped performing the part of myself that made his behavior comfortable. I stopped laughing when I didn't find it funny. I stopped volunteering explanations for choices that didn't require his approval. I said a true thing out loud at Christmas and let it sit there without softening it afterward. That's what I mean by intelligence in this context. Not cleverness, not strategy. Just the clarity to finally see a pattern for what it is, rather than for what the person running it needs you to believe it is. My dad's method only worked because I kept providing the interpretation he needed. That I was fine, that I was flexible, that his confidence in volunteering me was warranted. The moment I stopped providing that, the whole structure had nothing to rest on. And the grit part, the part people underestimate, is that doing the right thing for yourself doesn't feel triumphant when you first do it. It feels like loss. It feels like you were breaking something. I sat in that cabin listening to his voicemails, and the guilt was completely real. That guilt is not weakness. It's the evidence of how much you actually care. The question is whether you let it make your decisions for you. Tara told me early on, kindness without limits isn't kindness, it's just preemptive surrender. Cooper and Ivy didn't need me to sacrifice my recovery for them. They needed their parents to figure out their own childcare. My sister found a solution in about 48 hours. The crisis my dad had built up in his voicemails turned out to be a logistical inconvenience that adults with resources were entirely capable of solving. That's usually how it goes. The emergency that required your sacrifice resolves itself the moment you stop being available to absorb it. Not always, but more often than anyone who needs your sacrifice wants you to notice. I chose myself once. The mountains were still there. The coffee was still warm. And nothing that actually mattered fell apart.